most of our competitions one time or another.
Well, yeah, I think probably most of them at one day or another. Because this one the first time I did this, it was in the 5 bells, wasn't it?
Yeah, we normally.
I think the next time I did it, though, I'm not sure it was in the 5 bells, was it?
It's always been in the 5, up until last year when we couldn't meet. It's always been in the 5.
Oh,
bells.
is it? Oh, right,
yeah.
then okay, well, that's where I've done it then.
Mm-hmm.
Only this competition.
We're going back there when we
can.
The other competitions are at the church.
That's right.
The other ones are all in the Methodist Church in Halstead. Okay, shall we make a start then?
Why not?
Yeah, good evening, everyone. Can you believe we're at the final of the Top Dog already? It only seems like yesterday we did the first round, but it always does with this competition for some reason. So we're very lucky tonight to have Mike Fuller along to judge for us. It's the first time you've been judging for us in quite some time. So welcome back. It's very good to see you back because you're always one of our favourites. So
thank you.
Little bit of housekeeping before we start. If you can mute yourselves and probably turn off video as well while the competition's running, that would be good. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Mike and whoever is doing it, Jan and Lorraine and Susan rather. Okay.
Share my screen.
This is Susan's bit.
Get rid of my. Try and get rid of my video. Okay, I'm going to run through. go through these manually now. So the first competition was shadows.
Right. Okay. So as I said, I went all through these images a couple of times, and I was particularly interested to see how well I thought that the themes had been met in the images, whether they were actually, if you like, faithfully represented what the subject was, because it's all down to personal opinion, isn't it? But I'm always, if you've got a theme competition, I'm always very interested to see how well, or perhaps in some cases how not so well, the theme is met. Also, of course, looking for all the usual attributes of photography, whether it's abstract or any of those, the fact that it still needs to have composition and all of those sort of things that come through it. So I sort of looked at all of these in their section on that basis. So if you like, my criticisms tonight, where they are criticisms, will be based upon that, but most of it is a critique on what I thought of the images and how they come together. But I'm always also interested in stories as well. Even in the most abstract of images, there needs to be a reason that the photographer has actually created the piece of work, and I like to sort of try to understand that from what's presented. Okay, so the first one, corkscrew shadow dance. Well, this is quite ingenious. I thought this was a really clever piece of photography. It's got a very stylized feel to it. It looks almost back to sort of good old classic darkroom stuff that I used to do, when you sort of just get a sheet of paper and sort of lay things out on it and put it under the enlarger, and do all sorts of things like that. So I quite like this. It's got a sort of naivety about it, and I thought that was quite interesting. And I also like the composition, and the fact that it's just a straightforward, bold, black and white. I think it worked quite well. What I didn't sort of quite get with it was the shadows bit. Objects cast shadows. I see if these are the shadows. I was a bit struggling to sort of find where the objects were. But as I said, pictorially, I thought it was quite a good piece of work. So should we see the next one?
Pressing the button and nothing's happening.
Oh.
Gaslight.
Oh, there we are. Right, yes, gaslight. I was intrigued by this. I thought this was interesting from a number of points of view. Actually, there's a real story going on here, and you have to read into it a bit. And I was very fortunate that I was able to look at these on my big monitor, because I was able to see there's quite a lot more detail that was showing on the image as I was looking at it this afternoon, and it's perhaps evident on the smaller screen as I'm seeing it now. But I know what's there, and I was really impressed with the way that the photographer managed to create not only a story, but had really used this sort of subject of shadows so well. There's shadows and shadows and shadows, but they're all doing something that's adding to the composition, adding to the strength of the image, and adding to the story itself. Even right down on that far right hand side, where the sort of deep shadow is beginning to fall. There is something there which tells us that this is all about the shadows, and it is an image made up almost entirely of shadows, with just a few objects like the lit wall and the few light highlights on the side of the figure. So I really enjoyed this one. So next one, please.
Just one.
Well, it's a single shadow. The brief was shadows, and you've got a shadow there. It's quite interesting, isn't it? The way that the angle of the lighting is making this sort of spread, so that the top of the screw seems to cast a sort of slightly larger shadow than the base should. which sort of seems to tell us something about the placement of the light. And I thought it was quite interesting. It got almost a sort of a clock-like appearance to it. I wasn't quite so sort of taken on the overall composition. It seemed a bit sort of angular in terms of the background. You've got a very sort of soft and swirling background, but what you haven't sort of seemed to do is to sort of continue that theme into the rest of the story. So there seems to be, just for me, just a little bit of a disconnect there in the overall flow of the image. The other thing I felt as well is that the screw is actually the major part of the composition, and the shadow seems to be almost the secondary part of the composition. And I think that's due to placement. The fact that the screw is on that left-hand third, it's that gains our attention. And I think in terms of the competition, if you like, on the theme, I think it should have been more the shadow that actually made its sort of mark, and perhaps the screw being in a more supporting role. Next one.
Prancing shadows.
Yeah, this is sort of a little bit like the first one, isn't it? The fact of using almost the silhouettes and creating this sort of almost an abstract form with them. But I do enjoy the overlay of the window shadow. You can see that there is definite elements of composition. I like the way that the figures work against that background. The fact that heavily black against the sort of light magenta, it seems to just have a sort of a warmth to it, and it just sort of resonates, I think, in the placement and the composition. The fact that we've got all the squares behind and the sort of rather rounded shapes, there is a nice sort of contrast there, and compositionally I think it works quite well. And I thought it was quite pictorial, and it did actually embrace the subject well enough, I think, to be able to be considered to be an image of shadows. I think if you hadn't have got the overlay of the window shadow, I think you would have been struggling a little bit, because I don't really sense that the horse figures, whatever they are lying on their side, actually represent sort of shadows of the other of the main object. So it was a bit on the if side, but I say relieved and certainly made a little bit more successful, I think, from the fact that the window shadow is playing so much in the composition of the image. Next one.
Swinging.
I had a sort of thought about this and sort of trying to sort of get my head around it, and I sort of came to the conclusion that it was we were sort of upside down in some respect, and it's a sort of an image which has been rotated and given, that's the way it's seeming, because there does seem to be a reflected surface above the structure which is supporting the flower. So I'm a little bit sort of playing around with that before I got to the story of the subject itself. I just wonder whether this just needed to be a little bit simpler, really, and the play of the flower itself. And if we could have in some way avoided the use of the support, I think it would have been pictorial. It would have been stronger because it would have been simpler, and then it would have been much more about the shadow than as it is now, that my attention is taken very much to the support material and the support matter up in that top right hand corner, which is actually on that right hand third, is in a very strong part of the image. So again, I think we've lost a little bit of connection with the theme, that the shadow is there, but the shadow doesn't really appear to be, in my opinion here, the main part of the subject. It's certainly in terms of the eye catching, it's taken very much to what isn't the shadow in the image. Next one.
Man in the tree.
Yeah, I sort of got this almost in a sort of an accidental sense, really, because I was sort of imagining myself that, if you were walking around in woodland and trees and you had light coming behind you, what sort of shadows would you be casting, and how would it sort of appear? And I was sort of thinking that there's a certain strength in this, and the fact that you're allowed to play with the story a little bit in your mind. It's sort of the imagination of the wood and the the creatures that live in the wood. And we've seen, I think, you know, things like the Green Man and all these sort of things, which sort of got resonance to a lot of folklore and such like. So I did think this was quite a good idea. The way it was presented, I'm not quite sure how it's been achieved, because the shadow seems to be quite a sharp shadow. I think maybe if it had been some way of softened a little bit so that it looked a little bit more shadow-like rather than, you know, a sort of a silhouette, as it were, I think it may have made the whole thing a little bit stronger. But certainly I felt that it did actually capture the idea of the theme, and it did present a story that we could think about for a while. So do you want me to give the
yes, if you could run backwards through the 6.
Yeah, and you want me to stop when we get to the one that
I'll start from the beginning, and
yeah, okay,
and you can say which one.
yeah, okay. This is the one that's going into the next round.
Hold that one back.
All right.
So we should get the final images at the end. So this is the second competition, abstracts.
Oh yeah, well that's it's a sort of there's so many interpretations of abstract, aren't there? You know, it's one of these things that you really sort of need to think about, and everybody's interpretation of abstract. And in fact, for me, abstract is a very quite a simple idea, and it's sort of, in a way, it's taking forms which we generally don't consider to be part of, you know, the natural world, and sort of converting them into a sense that we are representing the world in a sort of a slightly different way. But it all comes again down to the use of colour and composition and such like. And also there still needs to be, in my mind, you know, a story in there that we can extract. If the story is only why the photographer, you know, decided to work in this way, or what the photographer was trying to represent, or what it was trying, you know, what the essence of the image was. So looking at this has looked like the Chihuly glass from somewhere, doesn't it? I've seen a lot of this sort of stuff around in the good old days when we could travel. I've been out to Las Vegas and places like that and seen all the Chihuly glass in the Bellagios and all of that. And, you know, and it is a very abstract form of art, not only in this photography, but also in the way that the glass is presented and the glass is actually created. I'm not sure if this is Chihuly, but it's the same sort of idea. And even if it's not glass, it's got that appearance of it. So I did like this, and I thought it's got an organic structure to it, which again, in some respects, mimics, you know, natural plant forms. And you could almost imagine here that you could have been staring down into a plant or something like that. But I'm, you know, as I said, I'm sticking with the glass theme because that's where it resonated. It's always, this is judge bait really, because you're always, you know, there's going to be some occasions when you make a very convincing argument it being something, and because it's completely different. But there we go. That's a chance we take. But you can only see it as you see it. But I do think this was quite a good piece of work. The next one.
Circles and swirls.
Yeah, I quite like this really for the texture of it. Really, it had a sort of a softness and a feel to it. It seems to be, you know, something that you could snuggle up to on a cold sort of winter's night. Really, it's got that sort of look to it, a very organic, almost a fibrous nature. I did struggle a little bit in the composition because I was sort of wondering where this is really going, really, and where the composition was. I understand that there is a colour change in the bottom sort of, you know, left-hand third, which actually does give a little bit of an anchor point, and the rest of the image radiates out from that point in a very regular way. And there is certainly an abstract feel to it. But I felt probably, you know, against some of the others which we're seeing, I thought probably it was just a little bit lacking in that sort of composition and definition. And I was a little bit struggling to really get the idea of what the photographer was intending us to take from this. And so I ended up, as I said, you know, snuggling up on a cold winter's night, really. But, you know, maybe the photographer had something else in mind when they were presenting it. But I think the colours are beautiful. It's got lovely softness to it, and the pastel nature of the colours seem to come together very effectively. There's one or two little bits in there which you might think were a little bit obstructive. There's some funny little things happening on the almost little eyes peering out of some of these little balls of things. I'm not sure what they are, but overall I thought it was a good effort. Next one.
Colour waves.
Yeah, I felt this actually was pretty good. In that the idea for me of abstract is it needs to have very good pictorial sense and composition, which this has. I mean, it's a very well balanced and it's a very well presented collection of shapes, which, although themselves don't, individually don't actually have any real sort of substance or resonance to any reality, when they come together in this sort of almost this organic mosaic, then they take on a different form. And I think the colours that have been used, and the fact that we've used the I don't know if it's deliberate or whether it's accidental or how effective, there is actually, in my mind, you can actually read into this the wording of wave. There's enough elements in there to convince yourself that you can see that, but it's not so strong that it takes over, but it gives you this little idea that this is what the photographer was working towards. And then you can see that it's sort of been backed off into this very strong abstract shape, but in amongst that abstract nature of it, there is still regularity, and the regularity gives it a confidence of composition, and it also gives it a feeling of completeness. So I really felt this worked very well. In fact, I kept on going back to this because, as I was saying, on my bigger screen, it really sang out to me. So yeah, good piece of work indeed. Next one.
Extraterrestrial.
Oh yeah, so I had some fun with this one. I was sort of looking all through this and looking at there's a lot in here actually. If you sort of start poking around and start sort of sensing what's there and searching out things, you realise that there's quite a lot of content. And I like the way that the colour scheme worked. I did like the use of the blues and the magentas and the orange in there. It's all in that sort of very sympathetic and very cohesive colour balance. And with those colours, then it becomes, it becomes a composition. The sinuous sort of waves, almost the mirror image, isn't it, in some respects? And I think that worked well, but it's sufficiently different not to be sort of overcome with that. You can still get a sense you can work around it and get a feeling for different things. It doesn't seem to have a real world representation. It's very difficult to sort of get into anything that this might be representing in an abstract sense, other than the fact that it is just the abstract nature of the composition itself. So I thought that was quite good. Next one.
Granules.
Yeah, this is looks to me a bit like I think these are probably salt crystals or something, but there's a bit of polarized light going on here, and there's a bit of photomicrography or something similar. I played around with this sort of idea myself, and you can do it with a couple of polarizing filters. You can get all sorts of interesting effects, and I like that. And I'm sort of thinking of salt. I might be thinking of sugar, but I think it's got that sort of, certainly salt has got a square crystal. I think this sort of works along those lines, and that's what I'm looking at. And you can actually see that there are planes of polarization in these crystals as the angle of the light changes. So technically, it's a really interesting image. But the problem I have with it is it doesn't seem to have a composition. It seems to be just a repetitive sense of what we've seen before. And when we look around, and there is a kaleidoscopic, I suppose a kaleidoscopic feel to it, because the corners tend to have these sort of blue elements, and in the centre there's a ring of sort of magenta and green, which separates out the yellow. So in some respects, you could be looking at this sort of a feeling that you're in a kaleidoscope. I don't sense we are. I would just like a little bit stronger in composition, and maybe disturb the arrangement a little bit so that we got something a little bit more positive to act as an anchor point. But clever use of light and clever use of photographic technique as well. Next one.
Hidden toadstools.
Well, I like again, I like the idea of this, is that we start off with something which is by nature and in nature quite sort of abstract, in the sense that, you know, that if you look at the form of fungi and things and all of these sorts of these organic materials, that they themselves can take on all sorts of abstract forms, and if you then take that and sort of use a little bit of creative manipulation to bend it and twist it and mold it and form it into something which takes it away from the initial sense of what the image was, but put it into something which you're hoping people will see as a sort of an artistic interpretation of that. Well, then, you know, this goes a long way along that line, and I do feel that there is a good sense of balance. There is certainly a composition there, and I think it just shows what could be done. I don't think it's complete though. I think there is a little bit lacking here in the way that you've addressed all of the elements of the story. There's still a little bit too much of the reality for me in the left-hand corner. I think you could have, the bottom left-hand corner, I think you could have included a little bit more of your manipulation down in that side, just to sort of bend it a little bit so that we don't have this sort of drift into sort of abstract back into reality, because then it sort of takes a little bit away from the you know, from the sense of what the story is. It's sort of semi-abstract, and I just feel it weakens it a little bit for that. Next one.
Norfolk shoreline.
Yeah, I mean, titles are almost irrelevant, aren't they? In this, with this degree of fracturing, if you like, of that original image, it then leads us. The title, I suppose, does no more than gives us a sense of where it comes from, and then we can spend a sort of a happy few minutes trying to untangle what's actually happened and imagining the original base image, which probably isn't what the point of the exercise is, really. So I in these ones, I sort of tending to discount the titles, because I don't think they actually help the interpretation of the subject. Well, what I did like about this is the flow of it. There's a real good network of connections and interconnections, and the seamless way that one color blends into the other, and then it comes to where it sort of moves to a different color, a color band. It sort of stops, and then it starts again as another color. You don't blend from the sort of the reds into the blues, or the blues into the yellows. You do have abrupt breaks there. And I think that gives a sense of depth and almost a sense of perspective as well. So yeah, I like this. I think it was a good effort. Next one.
Theatre.
Yeah, it's a ditto really from what I said before. This one I'm a little bit less sort of say less convinced by as an abstract, because I think it seems to be just a little bit more sort of accidental, really. There is a structure to it, you know, the disappearing vortex as we sort of tumble down into it, and I do like that. But it seems to be it's a bit of a one trick pony, really, because once you've done that, you know, there's not a lot else there that you're going to go back and think about. It's a sort of a shallow sort of abstract in a way that you can. You know, it's very easy to understand how it's been done, but when you get into it, there isn't that sort of continuity of interest that's going to keep taking us into other areas of the image. And it's a very central. It's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, you know, if you really want to make a point and direct, you know, attention just into one point and get that moment of attention, that's absolutely fine. But I do feel as though it just lacks a little bit of further content, really, just to keep the interest going. Okay.
That was the last one in that section, so I'll just run backwards.
Okay, so it's color waves that goes into the next round.
Okay. Old masters.
Yeah, this was a bit of fun. I enjoyed this. And I thought, you know, generally within the section, I thought it actually worked out pretty well against the subject. So the first one, the Lady of the Mask, yeah, it sort of speaks of our times, really, doesn't it? You just wonder, you know, you think about sort of masked balls and things like that. You know, you look at these old photographs, you sort of, I don't know really. I don't know how history is going to sort of relate to this. We've got this sort of period of a year and maybe 2 years, maybe longer, you know, when masks now become a fashion accessory, you know, and here it's almost if you'd gone back into the times of, you know, the 1600s or 1700s when there were sort of plagues and Black Death, you know, you don't actually ever see anybody being represented in these paintings done at that time of people walking around, you know, wearing masks and all these sort of things that they wear. I know they had the sort of the leather horns that they stuffed with herbs and all that sort of thing. So I'm just sort of wondering whether in 20 years' time, people will be looking at photographs and they'll be saying, "Oh, do you know, this is one of the 2020s, isn't it? Because we can see the masks." I don't know. I just wonder. I wonder how history will relate to this. But this I thought was pretty good, actually. I think you got a really good feel for the subject, and you've done extremely well in presenting that sort of old master feel, and with that sort of nod, you know, to the mask of today. And I thought that was a really good piece of work. I love the effect of the light that you've given us within the image as well. There's obviously there's some compositing going on and things like that, but that's absolutely fine. But the image itself actually works very well, and I do like that the little addition of the mask. It does actually give us a real story, and it does take us into the mind of the photographer very well. So next one.
Modern Matisse.
Yeah, it's sort of bit sort of on two levels with this. I was a little bit sort of a little bit reflective, let's say, in whether I felt that it actually became sort of strongly within the subject, because it is again, you've sort of borders on to some of the other subjects, and I don't get the sense of old master from this, quite frankly. I'm not saying it's a bad image, but I just wonder how well it fits in with the group, and given it a title which doesn't actually sort of represent it terribly well. I think, you know, the fact of the Matisse and everything. This seems to be of a different type of image to me. But speaking as the image itself, it's interesting. It's very simple, but it's effective in the way that the composition and such works. But I just felt that it just didn't seem to, you know, to take my feelings of old master really into in any strong sort of sense. Next one.
Sophie with a pearl earring.
Oh yeah, so I thought this was rather nice. It's certainly, in any sense, you know, whether this was in this section or not, it's actually it is a pretty good piece of work, actually. It's in terms of a portrait, it works very well. I like the lighting. I like the sense of completion in the work that you've done. You've created the mood. You've directed your performer here, which obviously, as I've said before, when I judge portraiture and such like, you know, you're judging a performance really, and you're judging how successfully that performance has been recorded, because, you know, she's in another state which is not a natural environment, and so she is performing, and it's your job really to bring that performance out. And I think she's done this very well, and you've managed to get a sense of not only of the theme, but you've done a very creditable piece of work with the portrait itself. So I enjoyed that one. Next one.
Stag in Turner-esque light.
Yeah, this is quite good, really. I did feel that the the use of the light and use of the simple motif of the stag was impressive. It certainly had that element of reflection back to some of the Turner works that we would be familiar with, Finding Temeraire and all of those. And in that respect, I felt that it did have a strength. What I felt it lacked, though, in terms of the Old Master, it wasn't robust enough in content and sort of execution. It was a bit sparse, and if we are going back into trying to sort of replicate the effect of the Old Masters and how they, light and content and composition and everything was very, very important. And I think this is perhaps just a little bit too simple to get that story over, to get that feeling of, an old master painting, if you like. I think it's just a little bit lacking in content. But in another class or in another section, it has particular strength, and it is a beautiful image of the stag and using light very well, I say. But I don't think it really sort of ticks all of the let's say the boxes required for the section.
The fourth,
Yeah, this was good. I thought this was really good, actually, because it looks thoroughly convincing, and it's extraordinarily well done in terms of the tonal detail and how you've managed to hang the lighting, the texture, and the composition all together to come up with something which is really a very convincing and I would say very artistic photograph. And what I also liked about this was that you've sort of copied the Old Master sort of approach in a way of the background. You've used quite a neutral background, but you've given it some texture. It's a little bit crumpled and it's a little bit lit. And this was very often used. If you look at some of these old masters, it was very often a case that a wall hanging or something like that would be part of the image, because you needed something to fill the background with, really, and so they would choose things which were appropriate. Very often it's another scene in itself, cherubs dancing around fountains in a mythical garden and things like this. So there was always something there to complete the story, and I think in this case, I think you've done that very well. And I believe that the engagement that we have with the character, is all about feeling that sense that we could actually be very much looking, at an Old Master, and it wouldn't look out of place if this was in a portrait gallery amongst other, if you like, genuine oil paintings of a period around sort of Van Eyck, so 1700s, 1800s, something around about 18th century. It wouldn't be amiss. You'd walk past it and you would be very convinced by it, and you'd also probably appreciate it as well. So I did like that. Next one.
Undiscovered Picasso.
Oh yeah, well, this is again, we go back to the theme, don't we? Because old Picasso isn't an old master. Picasso's a modernist. So this all started in sort of 1900, 1920. The old masters were sort of 16th, 17th, and 18th century. So I feel it sort of doesn't really tick the brief, really. I might be a bit pedantic about it. But themes are there. The titles of the theme are there for a purpose. So I would say that this sort of misses out a little bit on that. But that's really probably my only sort of criticism, apart from the fact that again it looks a little bit rough, really, in technique. We've got acute detail and lots of texture on one part of the face, and then it all goes sort of soft and rather fuzzy and not really distinct on the hair. So not only are we getting an abstract and almost a sort of if you like, that sort of Picassoistic feel, in shape, but we're losing it in the continuity of the image. So I just felt it was just a little bit complex and not particularly completed. But I say I don't really think that it actually sort of, you know, fits the old masters really terribly well. Next one.
Vase with 9 sunflowers.
Yeah, this is sort of you know, the bit of the Van Gogh bit, isn't it? You know, so but again, this is sort of you know, coming up into sort of, you know, a sort of a slightly more modern period of art. But I think it's sort of it's close enough. The thing with this though is that I felt that again it wasn't completed in terms of what you're trying to produce, because it's not painterlistic. It's very much distorted, and that doesn't give me that same sort of feeling that I would be looking for in representing, you know, artistic interpretations, if you like, of the world. And you know, we've been through the Picasso stuff, but you know, if you go into you know, Van Gogh and some of the others, they weren't so much abstract. They were simplified impressions of the world that they saw. And this, I think, is just a little bit sort of taken more in the abstract rather than the sense of we're looking at, you know, an old master's approach to it. However, as an image, it's actually quite attractive. I love the colours, and I do like the honesty of the form of it. It does lend itself into a very complete story. But I think this is more. I think this would do better in a sort of in another class. You know, I think I'd be happier to see this in sort of abstract rather than, you know, than in the class that it is. So, but it is, as I say, it's a good image, and I think this would do well in general competition.
Just go back. I think that's the last one in that section.
Okay, go through. Yeah, I'm just going to go carry on. Yeah, now I was really I was sort of, I struggled on this a bit because there were two here that I sort of really hovered over, and it was a Lady of the Mask and it was the Earl, the fourth Earl, and those two I actually sort of struggled to really to get a good sense of what, you know, which one I was going to go for and the reasons I was going to go for it. And in the end, I actually decided to go for the fourth Earl. And the reason is because I think this is a completely honest and completely fulfills the idea of the old master. And my feeling is about the earlier one with the Lady of the Mask. I think this is, again, is an excellent piece of photography, and it really deserves to do well. But in the class of the old masters, I think because this one is so authentic in the way that it represents that sort of genre, if you like, of art, that's why I chose the fourth Earl. But it was a narrow thing. I can tell you absolutely that if this one hadn't have been in it, it would have certainly have been the Lady of the Mask that would have gone through. But as it is, it's this one which goes into the next round.
Yeah. Urban landscape.
Yeah, this was a tricky sort of tricky section really, because urban landscape is sort of quite specific, isn't it, in what it's sort of asking for, and that, you know, landscapes in general are not details, and they're not archaeology, they're not architecture, you know, they're not those sort of, they're not statues. It's very specific, the idea of landscape and urban landscape, and I think what I was looking for in the section was to try to get some feel of scape, you know, some feel of spread and depth and all of that sort of thing. So and I was, when this one came up, I thought again, I just felt that this wasn't the right category really for this, or it didn't quite fit in as well as some of the other entries that we had in here. And again, that's not to say that it's not good photography, because this is actually a great image. I really, really enjoy it as an image. I think it captures mood, it captures light, it captures detail. It's got a wonderful composition, and I think including the figure down in that bottom right hand corner is absolutely brilliant, because it gives it perspective scale, but it gives it, you know, a connection to the use of the bridge itself, you know, that it's there for the use of people, and it was built by people, and it was built, you know, through hard work and great skill, and I just like that personification of it by having that character. But as I said, it didn't go too far in my selection, simply because I didn't get the landscape, you know, that feel of it. It's much more detail, and in this case, I think, you know, specifically architectural rather than landscapist. But as I said, a lovely piece of photo, lovely piece of work. So the next one.
Cartagena de Indias.
This is very pleasant, isn't it? It's got a lovely light to it, and I did like that. There's a freshness to it. There does seem to be a very, you know, a lot of definition in the color range in here. We've got very good tonal balance right throughout the image. Even the shadows have got interesting tones and textures, and the highlights are well contained. It's got a slightly sort of HDR sort of feel to it, and that's possibly to do with the very low lighting that's coming in, because it's got that sort of early. I'm not sure if it's early morning or a late evening, but it's got that low light, and that's certainly working to give perspective, and it gives it depth, and it gives it density as well. When we look at those really sort of cluttered buildings in the middle there, the lighting is sort of helping to sort that out and to give us a sense of pathway through the various elements in the image. And I think there's a good composition as well. So I did like that one. Next one.
Hallgrímskirkja Reykjavik.
Well, that was well pronounced. Well done. I wondered how you were going to manage that one. It's very strong, isn't it, in terms of the sort of focal point here, looking at this very almost sort of Icelandic feel, isn't it? When you think about all the lava and everything else like this, you could almost imagine it sort of being built from concrete made from lava. If you see it, you know, it just has that sort of Icelandic sort of feel to it, I suppose. And I just wonder if, you know, if that was part of the architect's mind to sort of represent the landscape. But of course, you know, this isn't, I think it'd be a bit of a stretch to consider this to be an urban landscape rather than an architectural image. And for that reason, again, I didn't consider it too long in the section, but I did really enjoy the strength of the building, and I think the photographer here has got extraordinarily good use of monochrome to be able to get such a wide tonal range and tonal balance, and still manage to keep all the detail, but also to get the drama as well. So, you know, it is a very powerful and a very strong image. Next one.
Liverpool skyline panorama.
Well, when you're doing sort of panoramas, really, you're after. Well, it's a bit like a sort of a meat and two veg, really. You're after more than one thing on your plate. I mean, when you're doing composition in sort of normal format, you know, 4:3 or something like that, you know, generally we're looking for one strong point of composition, and everything else flows away from that. But you know, when I was doing all of my panoramas, you know, I went wider than this sometimes. I very quickly learned that you actually have to start thinking about more than one. You have to think about not only the meat, but you've got to put a few potatoes in the mix as well to keep your interest. Because if you scan across a panorama, you're looking for a point of interest, then, you know, 2/3 of the image you're going to be ignoring. So you do need things to lead you through. And I felt that this one was just a little bit sort of lacking in that sort of center of, you know, of connection in how I'm supposed to read it. If you look on the left-hand side, you've got the Museum of Liverpool building there, which is quite low and linear. In terms of composition itself, it only really has one sort of compositional point, and that's obviously the sign where it says Museum of Liverpool. You might argue that the building above it on the left, with the sort of angular roof there, is adding. I think that might be even part of the museum, but that's adding a little bit of composition on that edge. When you get to the right-hand side, we've got the that other structure, the sort of the cathedral-like structure there with the tower and such like, and the building. So you're all right on the right, but it's a little bit sort of empty in the middle, really. And I just felt that there wasn't enough interest all the way across, really, to keep me in the feel of it, in the image. However, what you have done, you've used exposure very well. It looks as though it's a pretty sort of dull day. There's not a lot of light bombing around to give you, reflections and to give you shadows and give you that sort of stuff to try to sort of separate all this out. But what you have done with the light, you've managed to get enough exposure there that we've got good tonal separation all the way through, and the things themselves are defined by their tone. So, in a way, it works quite well. But I'd say I think it just lacks a little bit on the fact that it's a panorama. It doesn't seem to tick all of those sort of boxes, really. Next one.
Sitting on the dock of the bay.
Yeah, I can hear it playing. I've got a worm here. Oh, it's an earworm, isn't it? It just keeps going. Now, I've had this sort of hanging around me all afternoon, actually, thinking of the words of the song and hearing it in the background. So I'll never forgive you for that. But there we go. Yeah, it's got the mood to it, isn't it? And it's the subject we were looking for in here is urban landscape. And I suppose if you're in this environment, this is probably about as urban as you're going to get most of the time, unless you're in the big city. And I like the engagement of the person on the right there, just absorbing, the image out beyond them, and looking over this sort of bit of townscape and enjoying what they're seeing. So I think it sort of ticks all the necessary boxes, and it does have an interesting composition. We start on the right with the figure. We've got some cars and things there in the middle, which are actually giving some quite interesting reflections from the green of that for the first car particularly. And then we go off onto the left, and we've got the hill with the little tower on top. So there's enough in there to keep us looking around, and I think that's quite important. Next one.
Two worlds collide.
Yeah, I did like this, actually. I felt this was a good use of photography, but also, a good use of the subject. The urban landscape doesn't always have to be just, harsh buildings. It can be a balance. And when we think about architecture and town planning and all of these other things, very often, even in the bleakest of places, you can see there have been attempts to incorporate a bit of organic softness, if you like, into the harshness of the concrete. And the photographer here has managed to find that quite well, to able to look at the softer element, but always reminded as we look out that there's all of the buildings and everything beyond. So we're never going to escape the urban side of this landscape, but it doesn't always have to be quite so rigid and forming. So I did like this, and I looked at it several times, and I enjoyed it each time I looked at it, and also the composition, I think, worked extremely well. Next one.
Urban sprawl.
Yeah, it gives you a real sort of strong sense of the sort of the continuity of the way the building shapes are just repetitive on the outside. But that right deep down in the middle of this, you've got this little nest of sort of lower rise buildings, which you sort of think that someday they're probably going to go, aren't they? It almost seems as though the big boys are sort of crowding in on them, and at some stage they're going to just be swallowed up. And there'll be, as population density increases, they're going to need more and more workspace, more and more apartments, and it'll all sort of disappear into a sort of a linearity of sort of tall rectangular boxes, really, with little towers on the top to try to be the highest one. I don't know. So I think there's a story there. And as an urban landscape, it's far and wide, and it does give us the sense of the depth and the spread. And there is this sort of sense of composition as it sort of crowds in on the centre, and you can almost feel there's a sort of a dynamic there. And I think the photographer's done well with that. Next one.
View from the Shard.
Yeah, this I really enjoyed, actually. I sort of loved it for a number of reasons. One is that the perspective that we get from the viewpoint is excellent, because we're taken down into the center of the image very, very, very quickly, with the direction of the rainbow. It leads us down, and we arrive at Tower Bridge, and it looks beautiful in this light. But it makes a statement, you know, and we look around as we go out from the bridge, and we can follow a little bit down from the river, and then we get down into, you know, where the Isle of Dogs and places like that. You know, it's all beginning to sort of fade away, but the interest is always brought back into the centre of the image. And then when we come into the foreground, we've got much more accessible detail and strength in the buildings. It sort of comes together, you know, pretty well, really. And I did like that the feeling of the way that it all comes together, the way that it gets this sort of collection of buildings, but buildings in a form, and the landscape side of it works very, very well. I can see that, and I can feel it. And as I look down on this, you know, I'm enjoying it as a very interesting and you know, with a sense of sort of artistry as well, and representation of the London urban landscape at this point. Okay, so let's go through them again. Okay. This was, I'd say that this was actually one of the two that I ended up hovering between, and I was sort of looking to sort of reasons why I should choose one against the other, and I must say this one actually came very, very close to taking the section, and in fact I actually avoided it in the end. I went for one further on, and the reason being is that my sense of the subject is this, although it's a beautiful image, and there's also, I've explained why I felt that it worked so well. On balance, I think it sort of just lacked a little bit on the urban side, and sort of made a little bit more on the landscape side. So if you want to go on to the following ones. This one I felt was the one that I wanted to put through, because I think it ticked all the boxes, and it you know, apart from being a beautiful photograph, not just for the fact that you've got the very fortunate rainbow in there, but the rainbow is part of the story, you know, because this is you know, this is London, this is the southeast, this is you know, the if you like, the maritime climate that we have in the UK. You know, we do get rain, and we do get that, and that becomes part of the landscape. But when we see the light and the way that the light is working on all the buildings and giving us all those textures and tones, it really sort of shines right the way through the image. So I felt this was really, really good, and I did enjoy it. So this one, narrowly, I must say, because the Japanese garden one, I think that did come very, very close to this, but this actually just squeaked it to go into the final.
Okay, I'm going to stop there for an interval. Sorry, we're on to nursery rhymes.
Yeah. Right. Hickory dickory dock, the mouse ran up the clock. I like the mouse. I like the addition of the little ears. That gives it the sort of the story, doesn't it? Which is the, which I suppose is the the essence of this. I thought it was quite good actually. It's sort of got a sense of fun about it, and it's got quite there's attention to detail. You know, the clock struck 1, which is what we want it to do. Yeah, it's quite clever, and I think it was a good interpretation of the theme. And yeah, it's a good bit of Evening Without the Mouse included. It's quite a good piece of still life as well, because it's got this really good use of the light, lovely background. It's got a completion to it, so I did like that one.
Bounce up and down.
Yeah, Bounce Up and Down. It's sort of a good advert for the club there, of course. Well done. And you can see the bouncy bus. The wheels are bouncing up and down. It's a bit of a disconnect, I think, from the fact that we've got all of the speed and the energy and the bouncing of the bus, but the Teddy and the 3 dolls are sort of well, they're a bit static, really, don't they? It just sort of doesn't sort of complete the story, really. I think that just needs a little bit more to bring that all to sort of completion. I think, but again, but it's a bit of fun and good use of the elements you've got in there. I think it's composition. It works very well. So I just think it just a little bit incomplete, let's say, in the story, in the way that you've added all the other elements to the bus, but you seem to have just left the dolls out of it a little bit. But again, I did enjoy it as a sort of humorous study of that part of the subject. The next one.
London Bridge is falling down.
Yeah, some good work in this. I had a sort of closer zoom in on this as I'm sort of doing, as we're on the screen here. You as presented, it's a little bit difficult to get in to the detail, and I think that's probably what I felt was a little bit sort of slightly weak on it, really, is that I don't mind the tone of the image, the fact that it's sort of a bit grey and it's a little bit forlorn, and I can see that there's been quite a lot of work done with the getting enough buses in there to make a convincing sort of feeling of the capabilities of Transport for London. But what I didn't really appreciate so well was the fact that you've stood quite a long way back from where the distance. I would have thought there would be more of the story should have been maybe about the image about half the size and more detail, got closer into where you've done that excellent work on the bridge actually collapsing and all of that. That I think that was good, but it's just a little bit sort of distant from it, I feel. Next one.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Oh yeah, I did like this. Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Ones I call Fish Alive, and there it is. That's the only live fish in the piece. But it's more than that. It's all the attention to detail in this. It's lovely. It's a lovely piece of work in terms of composition. It's got a really sort of strong feel of artistry, and the sort of the freshly cooked fish there is the only one that's actually got a hook in it. And this is one of these sort of fishing games that where you dangle the hook in and you try to get the little thing at the front, which is fine for the 1, 2, 3, and 4. But very clever use of the other fish there to bring in this sort of sense that this is the one that's alive. And I thought this was pretty good, and it was a really well thought out interpretation of the theme. You could have done all sorts of things with this, but I think the way you've done it is absolutely right on the money. It does give me a really full sense that you're representing, and anybody who saw this photograph, without being told what the title is, or given any indications, if they knew the nursery rhyme and they saw the image, I'm pretty certain they'd work it out, and that's clever stuff. So next one.
Sing a Song of Sixpence.
Yeah, another really excellent piece of work, really. A really clever use of the whole of the image to bring in all sorts of themes, really. The 4 and 20 blackbirds baked in a pie. I actually counted them. I mean, you know, you've got to do something, haven't you? You can't go out very far. There's over 40 of them, so I don't know why we ended up with so many when the rhyme is 24. But anyway, but other than that, it just works. It's very dramatic. And use of the old ruined castle at the back there that I'm sure I should know the name of by now, but I can't. I don't know what it is. The dramatic lighting, the sky. So you know, really first class work. It's more than just representing the nursery rhyme. It's actually given us the whole essence really of a story. And again, if you wouldn't need to know what the title is to know what the title is, because it speaks so much of the of that nursery rhyme, but also the fact that you've just given us that little bit of manuscript there as well, you know. And I don't know, I'm not musically inclined, and I did try humming the first few notes, but from what I could see on the first line, it didn't make much sense to me. But it wouldn't surprise me if it was actually and wasn't the opening refrain of the nursery rhyme when sung. So I did like this. I think you done pretty well with this. Next one.
When I grow rich.
Yeah, oranges and lemons at the bells of St Clement's, and that's all there, isn't it? It's all just got that. It's got just the whole sort of bit of story about, you know, the bells and the money and all of that. I found it's just a sort of shade soft. I don't know why that should be. It doesn't seem to be quite as crisp. Whether that was quite deliberate, I don't know. To be absolutely honest, it doesn't actually affect my enjoyment of it that much. I still get it, and I still like the colour, like the lighting. You've included all of the elements within the composition to describe the nursery rhyme very, very well. And again, I think with just the oranges and the lemons was probably, you know, that's all you need, isn't it? To know, even if you didn't know it was a nursery rhyme theme, and you showed somebody this photograph and you asked them what they thought it meant, they wouldn't take long to work it all out, which again shows sort of the success of the completion of the brief, as it were, but also, you know, photographically, it was pretty pleasing as well. Next one.
That's the last one in that section.
Oh yeah, that's the last one. Okay, if you want to go back. Next one. Next one. Now this was the first of the troubling ones to me at the end, because I had to sort out which one I was going to put through. This I held in the frame along with another one, and it's still in the frame. But if you want to go on to the next one, and this one here, this was the competition for me in this particular section. It was this image and the one prior, and I found it very difficult really to sort of, you know, which one to go for, because they were so strong in what they were doing. And so I started getting right back to the sort of, you know, the basic sort of photographics of it, and, you know, composition and how the balance worked and all of that, and the completion. And I actually came, in the end, I came to this one because for me, it's just a complete package. It's a beautiful piece of work on its own right. It doesn't need to be part of a theme for this one. It just works as an image, but it works very well in the context of the nursery rhyme, and I just loved all the final sort of touches, you know, the manuscript and the way the lighting and all of that, the atmosphere. So this one is the one I actually put through in the to the final section.
Glass in the bathroom.
Yeah, okay. Well, this is sort of almost a given, isn't it? You know, if you've got glass bottles with lots of interesting fluids and lotions in and things, and then you photograph it through a piece of reticulated glass, you know, you're going to get some really wonderful sort of abstract lighting effects, but still connected back into that into that reality, if you like, of what the main subject was. And I like this. I just like the flow of it. I like the colours that were in the image. I like the composition. I like that very strong, bold blue on the right there. It's a really good anchor point, and all the other colours seem to sort of flow out from that. All the while, you've got the sense of glass and what it does, distorting and refracting and reflecting. So yeah, nice image, this one.
Lensful madness.
I didn't sort of so much, to be honest, get the glass bit of this really. I think I said earlier on, when you've got a subject, the subject itself is the key, isn't it? And to me, that's where the strength of the image needs to be. And in a way, it's sort of it's what the glass is, not sort of, if you like, what the glass does to me, in the sense of this section. And I think this one's much more about the light trails and all of that than it is actually about the glass itself. So I was a little bit sort of just a little bit sort of a little bit sort of put off by the strengths of the one part of the subject in contest with what I felt was probably should have been the principal part of it, which would have been that sort of the glass ball itself. You have given a very nice image, though. Again, a lot of these, which I'm sort of criticising, is simply for the interpretation of the theme, really. It's that they're not that they're poor images, they're actually excellent images. But, it's not just the image, it's the connection to the theme, which is important to me as well. And so this one sort of just slipped by a little bit on that one.
My Fractured Gallery.
Yeah, this is this I really I got taken with this really quite early on when I was looking at it into the run through. I did the first, and I sort of stopped at this one and I had a good old poke around in it, really sort of trying to work how I thought. Blinking heck, this is four of these glass blocks, isn't it? And you look at it and you think, what's going on in there? But all the time, it's abstract, but it's not. It's a sort of a really sort of well represented feel about what this glass is, and it's just glass in its pure sense. It's nothing more than that, but it's so well seen and well constructed in terms of the composition of the image and the way that all of these four blocks, I suppose, come together. I did like this. I did feel that there was a good sense of composition and a good sense of the main subject that was required.
Reflections.
Well, I mean, how much glass do you need, really? I mean, it's just acres of it, isn't there? And I like that. Again, it's much more for me. This seems to sort of speak more of what the glass is doing rather than what the glass is. In some respects, the fact that it's the reflected surface. So most of the content of the image is what is reflected in the glass rather than the glass itself. And you might say, well, if it's the actual glass reflections had been the subject, then I think this would have been an extremely strong contender. But glass is the subject, and for me, the glass is there, but it's not the main subject. It's what the glass is doing, and it's what is using the glass, if I can put it that way. And it's actually the reflections of the other buildings of what are sort of making what making the image. So again, I liked it. It's got a lovely composition to it, and I do like those sort of radiating lines coming out from the left up into the top and the right, and it sort of got real composition, a good strength of balance. Interesting, and in another section of an image, I think it would do very, very well. Next one.
Refraction.
Yeah, this was quite good, isn't it? It's sort of it's the same thing in sort of in repetition, but it's done in such a way that we get the sense that there are actually sort of four 4 separate objects, although in fact, you know, if you look at the image, it's pretty clear that you've only got sort of basically 2 images twice. So, you know, your top left and your bottom right are the same image. In some respects, it's sort of, you know, it's got that sort of feel to it, but that's not a problem, because as it comes together in this sort of kaleidoscopic sense, it actually begins to work as a structure. And what again we're seeing very much in what the glass is as well as what it's doing, because you've got those really solid bases on the bottom, and I like that. So, you know, you might argue that it's a little bit sort of, you know, repetitive. Maybe it lacks a little bit of the feeling of connection with that single element of glass, but I think it works well enough. And once if you can stand to look at it, you know, long enough, it actually takes on a form. The problem is that you start going bonkers, don't you, with all your eyes going everywhere. But yeah, good piece of work.
The Inner Man.
I like this. I liked it as an image, I must say. I did feel that the use of the figure inside the glass and all of that actually, to me, as an image, is excellent. It's got a lovely strength and a feeling of sort of purpose to it. And I'm even as I'm looking at it now, I'm sort of trying to work out some of, you know, what's in there and what's not in there, and how it's happening. And I sort of came to the conclusion that it's the glass shape of the hollow glass head, and then there's various pieces of material and such like which have been introduced into it, and then the lighting is almost allowing the glass to create a face-like structure on the substance of the you know, the silk and whatever it is in there. And I thought that was really well constructed. The thing about it that I really enjoyed was the glass is the thing that really makes the story. You know, that is the whole essence of the image. It's this really strong feeling and the connection to the glass itself, and the fact that, you know, we're interpreting it in a much more organic sense as being a person or a head, you know, when it actually isn't. It is just glass, but the glass is taking on that persona because of what the photographer's done with the extra additions of the infill inside and all of that, and the lighting and everything. So, you know, I think you really got this really well. It just shows you what glass can do, and it is the glass which is the essential part of the story here. So next one.
3 glasses and a bottle of gin.
It's been drunk. It's not fair. It's an empty bottle, isn't it? I think I can't see any gin in there. That's a shame. Mind you, 3 glasses. I suppose, you know. I don't know. Has everybody noticed now that how many kinds of gin that you can get? I went into the supermarket the other day, and there was a whole, almost an aisle of gin. I mean, you know, how many do you need? There's only, I mean, blue, you know, Bombay Sapphire is probably the only one you need, isn't it, really? But I mean, it's just a whole industry. It's created, isn't it? You know, it's just everybody's got to be going out buying all these weird and exotic gins. Glass, well, there's plenty of glass in this one, isn't there? Silent pool, intricately realised gin. I don't know what that means, but we can think about that one. Yeah, I liked it. So I like it's a good old, to my knowledge, sort of not derogatory in any sense at all. You know, it's a good old school sort of still life, isn't it, really? You know, line up the glass, get the lighting working, get a nice dark background, and then you can start getting some sort of sense of depth and texture and shape and form. And I think we've come together pretty well, actually. Next one, which is, I think, is the last one, isn't it?
It is. Wine bottle and glass.
I love the sort of the very minimalist sort of feel of it, and the sort of the very low key, almost the fact that you've got to go in and really explore it and try to interpret it in some way. So, you know, all this sort of lower tone stuff really, I really enjoy, because it plays in your mind, really, and you spend quite a lot of time just enjoying the shape but all the time you're thinking, what is it, and that your mind is building the rest of the story. And so again, as an image, I found this very, very satisfying. It's sort of very, 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 very complete in its the artistic and very pictorial sort of nature of it. I was less convinced with the connection to the theme, though. I think the distance away from being able to realise the glass element and seeing this as anything more than the use of reflections and light, I think is a little bit of a strain. But as an image, I found it absolutely beautiful. So that's it. So do you want to go back and I'll tell you which one we got through in this one? Again, it was a bit of a struggle, really. Go on to the next couple. Yeah, this was sort of in the counting for a while, because I did like it. It's as I said before, it certainly is all about the glass and the way that it's working and the shapes and things. So this was a very strong sort of contender, but unfortunately for this author, it just got picked slightly. If you want to go on. And we come to this one, and I thought this was excellent. It just seemed to be absolutely there in all respects. And again, if it hadn't have been for this one, then my earlier choice, which I noted would have come through. But I'm afraid this one was just too good for it, really. And so this is the one that goes into the last section.
Okay, so we should have 6.
Have 6. Perhaps we just need to go through and refresh ourselves with them, should we?
That's fine.
Yeah, go through again.
Oh, hang on, sorry, done that
No,
wrong.
that one, nice try, but that one didn't get it.
Oh, I have to press the right buttons. Oh no, I'm not leaving the meeting. Stop it. No, stop it. Oh, hang on.
Don't worry, we've got plenty of time.
Why isn't it going to the next one? No, it doesn't like that. There should be a way of going through these. But it's not playing ball tonight.
Yep. 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 Okay. Right. Well, with suitable drama and tension introduced into the proceedings, I'm going to sort of knock out the 6th and the 5th and the 4th, and leave the 3rd, the 2nd, and the 1st place in the show. So, unfortunately, Colour Waves goes at this point. Goodbye, Colour Waves. We've enjoyed your presence.
I don't know how to do that. Unhold it.
I think if you bring it up again and you
Doesn't-
just take out
it
the
doesn't-
held, if you want something like that,
Oh,
even if you just give it a 0, that should take it out.
tricky competition, this one. Right, there we go.
Right. So we're down to 5 now. And the next one, unfortunately, goes, even though I raved about it because I really did enjoy it. Unfortunately, it's goodbye to View from the Shard. And the next one, unfortunately, that leaves us tonight is, notice how I'm pausing just for that extra little added piece of drama. The Fourth Earl. Okay, so we're down to the last 3. We can only have one winner tonight, but we've got a 3rd place, and the 3rd place is the Inner Man.
Jan, can I give that a placing? I don't think I can.
Doesn't matter, we can leave it up if you like.
Down, yeah.
You
Yeah,
probably
just
just
write
give
it
it a
down.
mark of 3, I guess.
Don't worry. So it's all there, isn't it? We can see we know that it's 3rd.
Yeah.
Nothing will happen that will change that, unfortunately. Now, because the drama all sort of falls apart now, because as soon as I announce the 2nd place, then the 1st place is obvious. And then, unfortunately, then the 1st place doesn't get all of that sort of added drama of being announced. So I'm going to announce the winner now. And by default, you'll know which is the 2nd place. Is that suitably dramatic? I think it is, isn't it? So my choice for 1st place, and this, I would tell you, was very, very difficult. Looking at the quality, all of this is, there's a lot of personal stuff comes in, but this is not personal, I personally like this one over this. It's how I've looked at the technique and the storytelling and the fitting the brief and all of that. And for me, the winner in this section, the top dog for the evening is Sing a Song of Sixpence.
Am I going to? Oh,
So obviously,
I'm just
Gaslight
going
is 2nd.
to, 10 plus.
Well done, Brian. I believe that's Brian's, isn't it? Well done, Brian.
Well done, Brian. Well done,
Okay.
Brian.
Well done.
Well done, Brian.
You should have the authors
Yeah,
match up.
congratulations.
Lovely image, Brian.
Worthy winner, though the other 2 are equally brilliant.
Now, I suppose you might be interested in what my personal favourite is for the evening,
Definitely.
because it's neither of these 3, and I work on the basis whenever I'm asked for a personal favourite, I have a very simple way of selecting it, and it's just that if you were allowed me to take one of these home tonight and hang it on my wall, which one would it be? And it would be the Fourth Earl. So my favourite is the Fourth Earl. Although I think in terms of the competition, the 3 which I've given here are the 1st, the 2nd, and the 3rd.
I'm just going to tell you who the authors are because it's not coming up automatically. So as you say, the first place was Brian Fleming. 2nd place is John Kay. And third place is Rosie Carpenter.
Well
Um,
done.
The fourth Earl is Derek Collis.
Oh, well done, Gary.
Well
Yeah,
done, all
very
of you.
good.
That was brilliant.
Yeah, I thought they were really good. The whole lot were really good, weren't they? I mean, some of them maybe a little bit wayward on the subject, but overall, I think it's a very creditable offering, considering we've all been stuck indoors for 12 months. You know, it's a pretty good effort all round, and congratulations on keeping your club going as well.
Yeah, we've managed to do quite well on that regard. I think we were early adopters of Zoom, so it may seem like we're struggling, but we're not. We're quite used to dealing with this now. I think Steve's got something to say. Am I right, Steve?
Yes, indeed. I would like to say, Mike, what a delight it's been to listen to your analysis. But I'd want to take you back to the 8th of April 2015.
Really?
Monoprint competition. I used to keep notes in those days.
Oh, did you? Right, yeah.
Yeah, it says
This is
superb technical analysis. Observes technique, composition, but always says, where is the story? What is the narrative?
Oh, really?
And I think that, you know, you've been absolutely wonderfully consistent in doing that, because it's a lesson that we should all take on board and keep, because that is a fundamental to this kind of photography. You also said monochrome is about detailing, quality, and using an appropriate subject, and this is not easy to do, and that is another truism. But I just would like to say thank you for your very thoughtful analysis. We have had some judges who knew a bit about art but didn't really pay much attention to the entries, and we've had some judges who didn't know anything about art but did pay some attention to the entries. But today we've been delighted. I've been delighted that you put so much thought and care into critiquing every single one of these images. It's much appreciated. Sending out the images in advance is advantageous to us all, but of course makes greater demands of the judge in terms of his time. So
no, I actually think it's easier, because if you can see them as I see them on, you know, on my monitor here in preview, you know, it gives you a fair and proper appreciation of the image. You're not scrabbling around just seeing them on, you know, on the iPad or whatever, trying to work out what is and what isn't, you know. So I think it's a great idea to send them out beforehand.
Well,
and I appreciated that.
Yeah, we appreciate how much more work is involved in terms of time, though. But it certainly does result in a better outcome. Very often, judges tell us to be careful about the titles, and that the title can almost make or break the way that people observe the image in the first place. When I was having a look at your website today, I noticed your email address, and it made me think about this thing about what you call a photograph and how much it gives it away. Because your email address is Natural World Fine Art at Pipsera, and I thought, that's amazing. There's a wealth of information there in an email address. And of course,
but be aware the website hasn't been touched since 2015, probably when I came to see you.
Nevertheless, it's the email address I thought was the allegory for the title of a photograph. But I think you did very, very well tonight. I think you certainly got the right outcome. The drama would have come if you hadn't have revealed the 4, 5, and 6, because then you don't know whether you've won or come last. But certainly a roll of drums would have been very appropriate at one point there. So we're massively grateful to you for your time, for your care and attention, and for reminding us always to tell a story. So I'm going to ask the club to show their appreciation in the traditional way, put their hands together and say thank you very, very much, Mike Fuller.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hey, Mike.
There's one little thing that comes to mind. You've reflected back on my visit. When was it? In 2015. It must be the first time ever that I can actually say, oh yes, I had far less hair then.
It certainly did.
Nice
Yes,
one.
definitely a lockdown hairdo, Mike.
It's actually it's getting worse than this, because this is I've been growing this assiduously for the last sort of 12 months, because we have a hairdresser who comes and visits, and she can't, obviously she's not been coming, and I certainly wouldn't trust Ursula with a pair of scissors, because I've got a good idea of what she keeps reminding me that what she's even threatening to do me when I'm in my sleep. But we're hoping to have a family get together in the end of September, with all of my nieces and nephews, and and great nephews and nieces and family, and all of my nieces now are all trying to compete to see who's going to have the pleasure of cutting my hair off in September. So in one respect it's a bit of a pain, but the other thing, I've now got an excuse to keep it growing for another few months. But it's all a hoot, isn't it, really?
People might not be aware of your support for the Orangutan Society.
Oh, the Orangutan Foundation. Oh, yes.
Yeah, it just occurred to me that if you dyed it all ginger.
Be a good advert.
Yeah. Now that's a thought. Yeah, well, actually, I'm glad you mentioned that, actually, because I was asked about donations. So I've actually, if the club cares to, I'm not taking any fee, but if you want to send a few pounds off to the Orangutan Foundation as a donation, I'll be very pleased for you to do that. I'll give the details to your treasurer.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Who's your treasurer here? I can't remember.
He's not. He can't make it tonight. His
No,
name's
that's right.
Yeah.
I gave him the details. He wrote to me.
Yeah.
Well, actually, a couple of you wrote to me, and I've given him the details. But I say, just a few pounds. Be very grateful for him. So thank you for offering to do that.
Will be done.
Yeah.
Lovely. Well, let's look forward to a very bright future, shall we? You can see the sun is just rising over my shoulder here.
Yeah, thanks ever so much.
That's a pleasure. Lovely to see you all again.
Yeah, and you.
Look after yourself, and
Thank you.
let's hope for better in the future.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mike.
Bye. Good night.
Very much
Good night,
indeed.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye, Brian. Good night, all.
Good night.